Hi guys. Welcome to this DBQ stream. This stream's about how to do the DBQ, also known as a document-based question. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a question that you answer based on documents that you're given. So before we even get into any information, you might want to follow Fiveable on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. I really recommend following us on Twitter. We have a department that focuses on just social media, and there's a bunch of like hilarious memes about like different AP exams. Like I was just on there today and I saw one about like AP Chem starter pack. And if you've ever taken chemistry, they had a picture of like an eye wash station. And honestly, it's like very academic, the stuff that they post, while still being really fun and interesting. And I just recommend that you really follow us, even if it's not for memes or stuff. We do have a lot of educational content on all of these platforms. So in this stream, I'm going to start off with a quick all about me, just so you know who I am, why I'm here, and then we're going to get into the real meat of the presentation. It's going to be a little introduction about the document-based question, and then how it's scored. And then once you understand the basics of the DBQ, I'm going to go over an actual prompt from the 2017 AP World History exam, and then I'll be going over how I would use all these documents and how I would write it. And I actually prepared for this. I wrote an entire DBQ in the allotted time period that you get. So I actually wrote a whole DBQ. So I'll be sharing with you what I would have written if I were in the same circumstance or if I was getting that prompt. So all about me. My name is Charlie. I'm from New Jersey. I'm from right by New York City. So I have a lot of, New Yorker in me. I feel a lot more than someone from Jersey. I'm from New Jersey. I'm a sophomore in high school. I took AP World History as a freshman, and I got a 5 on the exam. So yeah, that's just some basic background information about me. And now we're getting into the actual presentation. So the DBQ is also known as a document-based question. And it's called this because when you do your document-based questions, you want to use the documents that they give you to make a valid historical argument. And you want to take all your evidence from these documents to create a solid argument, a solid statement with a solid thesis, and you want to have just a solid stance. It's one question, which is really nice because I like having one question. I did like the SAQs. SAQs are amazing, but I also like having just one question to do during an allotted time because I feel like it's a little less stressful. You have 1 hour to do one question, and that 1 hour includes a 15-minute reading period. This is called a reading period because you're supposed to read all your documents in this 15-minute time frame, but I'm going to make these slides a little bigger because, okay, so you can see this, sorry. They call it the 15-minute reading period because you're supposed to read during this 15-minute period, but while you're doing your actual reading, I like to take notes, organize all my documents into separate categories, and while you're reading, take notes, of course, plan it out, write your thesis even if you have time. It's not just a time for reading and reading your documents and trying to figure out what to do with your documents. It's also a time for you to maybe start grouping your documents together with similar opinions. And I see someone from my school is actually watching this right now. So hi. Mr. Dordo, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, Diordo. He's asking, do you organize your documents in your pre-reading notes? Usually when I'm reading, I like to organize them into separate groups. Oh, perfect pronunciation. Thank goodness. Okay. So I have something right here. This is something my AP World teacher used to do, so I don't know if you can see, but it's a chart. And it's on top of the chart, it says which documents go together and how. So when it says which documents to go together and how, I like to put documents that have similar opinions, maybe people from similar geographical areas, and I like to sort them into categories. And it says right here your document numbers, so you put your document numbers. Of course, you wouldn't have this during the actual exam, but it's nice to have right now, especially because it's so early, it's still October, for you to plan this out on paper while you're doing your actual DBQ. It keeps everything a lot more organized, and once you actually become accustomed and used to doing it this way, it makes it really easy on the AP exam. And that 15-minute time period, you already read everything and you already planned out your entire DBQ in just 15 minutes. So you have another 45 to write. Hi, Camille. Camille asked, how did I study for my exam? I had the Strayer's Ways of the World textbook, and I also had a 5 Steps to a 5 book. I'm looking at it right now. 5 Steps to a 5 AP World History, and it's from 2018 because I borrowed it from someone who had taken the course the year prior. I wouldn't recommend getting an older book now just because of the changes they made to the AP World History course. Now that it's focused mainly on modern history, I'd recommend that you get a 2020 version. Something that a lot of people ask is if you should get a premium or a regular book. I think that it's fine even if you get a regular book. If you don't know the difference, regular books usually have 3 practice tests or 2 practice tests and 1 diagnostic that you're supposed to take at the beginning of the year. And the premium have 5. That's usually the only difference. And the only reason why I would say that the premium is a good thing to have, but it's not necessarily like essential, is because you can get, if you have a College Board account, you can get practice SAQs and DBQs and everything. And they even have practice multiple choice on the College Board website. So it's not something that's completely essential. It's not something that you need an extra 2 practice tests. If you feel like you definitely need the extra 2 practice tests, go ahead. But I feel like you can get the same exact content by going onto the College Board website. It's an amazing resource. And if your teachers use AP Classroom, there's a lot of good resources on there. I've heard too with some practice FRQs and MCQs. So I'm going to go over scoring. So scoring, their first point is called the thesis, or sometimes a lot of teachers call it the claim point. And this is something we also see a lot in English. It's they call it restating the question. It's almost like that in AP World. So when you have a question that you need to answer for your DBQ, your thesis point is going to come from you responding to it. So in English, we're usually learned to completely restate the question and then end it with a period. But that's not exactly how you want to do it for this course, because you will not get the thesis claim if you just say, repeat a question. So I'm actually going to take the question from the DBQ we're going to practice later, and it's about wealth accumulation in religion versus wealth accumulation in just ancient civilizations. So something that would not get the thesis point is wealth accumulation was prevalent in early religion and early civilization, period. You would not get the point for that because it's so broad. You didn't exactly answer the question. When you're doing your thesis point, you don't want to be overly specific, but you want to include a bit of information so that the person who's grading your essay, the person who's reading your essay, knows the point you're trying to make throughout this essay. Because if you don't have a strong thesis, it's just going to confuse the reader afterwards. So I'm going to actually read the thesis that I wrote. It's highlighted on this piece of paper. I'm going to just read it quick. In the period from 600 BCE to 1500 CE, religious responses to wealth accumulation in Eurasia different from state responses. And then if I just ended it there, I would not get the point because it's just very broad. But I continued it by using the word because, and then I gave my reason. So that's why I got a thesis point. So continuing, ... because religious people and their institutions focused on the morality of making large sums of money, while the state focused on using it to solve realistic issues. So because I decided to choose and include that second part that really just describes my point, and it uses what we see in the documents later, I got the thesis point. You don't need to be overly specific. Don't write a whole paragraph for your thesis point. At most, your thesis should be 2 sentences, and that was 2 kind of long sentences, so it wasn't the best example. But your thesis, you just want to be short and concise. You don't need to ramble on and on because the thesis point is just your introduction sentence. So your next point is contextualization. So contextualization, I always like the contextualization point. When I'm planning my essays for DBQs, I like to put the contextualization right at the very top. My first paragraph would be contextualization. And this is something I just did because I thought it sounded very nice as an intro. And my first paragraph would be contextualization statement, and then I would end it with my thesis or claim, which you can see highlighted. That's my first paragraph right there. So I know a lot of other teachers do the thesis first and then the contextualization. Either or, it's fine. I know people that put the thesis point in your conclusion, which you'll still get the point for that if you have it in your conclusion. So it doesn't matter. But just for the sake of this presentation, I'm just going to be talking about how I put it at the very top because that's how I wrote it. So contextualization is when you want to address what's going on in the world in the time period that you're given in your DBQ. So in this DBQ that we're going to go over later, it's from 600 BCE to 1500 CE. So you want to talk about any event that happened before, during, and after that time frame. So it's such a large area of time. It's really hard to think of one specific event that you think would support the argument most. So definitely try to think of like a very important event, something that's very prevalent, and something that's related to the actual prompt. So because this prompt was about wealth accumulation and religion, my idea for contextualization was to relate it to religion and the formation of religions, which is not in the AP World History curriculum anymore just because of the year changes, but it's something that I wanted to include because I know about religion and I could relate it back to the actual question. I knew about Hinduism, so my contextualization focuses mainly on Asian religions. And then I related it back to the question about religious responses to wealth accumulation. And your contextualization should not use any of your documents. Your contextualization should be your prior knowledge going into the AP exam. So you shouldn't cite any documents, any ideas from the authors. You just want to give a historical background as to what's going on at this time, and then explain how it's related to the prompt. So I'm going to just briefly read my contextualization that I wrote. Wealth accumulation in early religion was frowned upon. In early Hinduism, many believers thought that in order to reach salvation and live a pure life, followers would need to donate to others, known as Hindu asceticism. This belief was seen later in Buddhism through the Four Noble Truths, which stated to give up wealth in order to reach nirvana. The beliefs of states on wealth accumulation differed, however, as they used it to solve regional issues. So this is a very broad contextualization. I did not relate it to the big global picture. I did not relate it to the big time period. So something I would definitely want to include when you're doing your contextualization is related to what else is going on in the world, the question. So maybe I would talk about how this religion at the time gave people these certain views, people in different nations, and not nations at the time, different civilizations, different places around the world, and they gave them these certain ideas of what's right and wrong when it came to money and wealth accumulation. And then I would go into my thesis, and my thesis would just go over the actual prompt, and it would wrap everything up. There's your first paragraph right there. If anyone has any questions, be sure to leave them in the chat. I feel like I'm kind of rambling, but it's DBQ is really unlike any writing people do in other history courses. So it's definitely something you want to be sure that you completely understand, especially because these are the first 2 points you're going to get. So they're only 1 pointers. You'll see there's actually things that are up to 3 points. So your next point is called evidence from the documents. So even if you only get 1 point in this category, that's still really great. Evidence from the documents is exactly what it sounds like. You want to describe the content, the stuff that the documents are about. You want to describe what is the person saying for at least 6 of your documents. And if they're art, you can talk about what you see in the art. If you've ever done a DBQ, you'll see before, usually not all of the documents are written sources. They're not all letters. They're not all actual written sources. You'll see that the occasional one is art. The occasional one is anything. It'll be sculpture. So the content doesn't exactly mean what's written on the page. The content just can include what you see. Especially when you do art, you want to do just a visual analysis, maybe a little bit of a formal analysis, if anyone's ever taken AP art history. So you want to take the information from the text, restate it, describe what the person's saying, and then use it to support your argument. So if I'm saying wealth was frowned upon in religion, by supporting my argument, I would take one of the documents that from maybe someone who's a priest, maybe someone who lives in a predominantly Catholic area, talking about how being rich is not good in Christianity. It's just something that's looked down upon if you don't give your money to the church. And that's something that you could use to relate to your argument. So we have evidence from the documents and evidence beyond the documents. So evidence beyond that documents is when you want to use your own personal historical knowledge to think of an event that supports your argument. So maybe an event that's not mentioned, it cannot be mentioned in your documents. It has to be something that you as a historian, because all people taking AP World are historians, something that you as a historian just know about that relates to the prompt and will relate to your argument. So because this is about religion, maybe wealth accumulation, we can talk about Martin Luther and the 95 Theses. I don't know if everyone's in this part of world history yet. I feel like it's kind of early in the year to already be here. But Martin Luther was German, and he wrote something called the 95 Theses. And essentially, he accused the Catholic Church of selling indulgences, which were basically you paid the church and you'd pay your way into heaven. So this relates to the prompt because it has something to do with wealth accumulation and has to do with religion. Something that's not stated in any of the documents that you'll see later. So it's definitely, that would be something I would include. Next slide, your other points. So you have your sourcing point. So your sourcing point is you want to take at least 3 documents and you want to explain why the author, his or her perspective, their content, the purpose of the writing. You want to explain why it's important. So let's say you have a priest, right? And this priest, I don't know if there's exactly a document on this, but I've seen documents like this in prior DBQ. So there's a priest who's talking about, in a letter, he's writing about how it's good to be wealthy because this money should go to the church. The church needs money. You should give all your money to the church because the church is great. And you want to explain why his perspective is relative to the argument. You can maybe go over his bias because he's a priest in a church. Of course, he's going to want money because he's a priest who works in a church and he wants all the support he can get, you know? So you'll want to explain why this example, this perspective is relevant to the argument, why his bias may affect the argument. I usually like to go the bias route with this one for a lot of them because I just find that not necessarily many of the documents are biased, but you'll see that a lot of the documents are biased. There's people who say that you should do this, but the only reason they're saying that is because it'll benefit them, it'll benefit their country, it'll benefit their religion. So there's a lot of bias present, and especially the letters. The letters usually have the most heavy bias. So if you're not going to go the bias route, if you cannot find any bias in any of your documents, maybe explain why it's important that this author is writing this letter. Maybe he's writing about Chinese politics and he's a politician. Of course, because he's a politician, that's going to make his argument really valid and it's going to make it important because he's knowledgeable. He knows about this. So it's something that he knows about. So that's why his perspective That's why him being the author is really important to the argument. And the next point that you can get is the complexity point. And the complexity point, essentially you get it if you make a complex argument. And that sounds really broad, but that's essentially what the point is. So to get this point, you want to show that you understand history by using evidence to support your claims. And this evidence, of course, you're going to get evidence from your documents. Take the evidence from your documents. You're going to take the information from your documents, but you're also going to want to take information from just your prior knowledge, even relate it to other events, which is almost like the evidence outside of the outside evidence point, but relate it to the topic and find connections between many, many events. That will get you the complexity point. Because if you can relate anything in history to something that happened way later, way earlier, or something about a completely different topic, and you can relate them, you've created a complex argument, a complex historical argument that's very valid and very strong in reasoning. So that's essentially the scoring. So before we get into the documents, something I want to go over is the importance of reading the extra titles on the top. So when you see a document, the first thing that'll show up is the author's name. And usually when it's an unknown person, they mention someone that's not very historically known, they'll write a short little bio, a short little thing about who this person is, where they were, what they did, and when they lived. So before I even read this prompt, I want to explain how important it is that you read this, because sometimes those include really just important information that you should know about the person. Maybe because they lived in Sui, China, that may influence their ideas on something. Just because they maybe they were the first emperor of the Roman Empire, if it says that, that may affect how you may look at the argument, what the person's saying. Maybe it may affect your idea of the author. Maybe you see the author is more educated now, and now you can use that for your any previous points that you have. Small points at the top do give so much information. They are really important to read and include because they're kind of overlooked during exams. When people are taking the exams and reading the documents, the first thing they want to do is get into the real meat, the real paragraphs, the big paragraphs, because they think they're going to take so long to read. But in reality, there's so much information in these little tiny things on top. And as we get into the documents, you'll see that there's some things that you can include that may help you when you're trying to explain the historical context, maybe your intended audience, your author's purpose, or your author's point of view and how it's relevant to your argument. So the prompt for this one, I've already said it, but I'm going to actually say the true prompt, and it's from the 2017 AP World History exam. So the question is, evaluate the extent to which state responses to wealth accumulation in the period circa 600 BCE to 1500 CE differed from religious responses to wealth creation. So, sounds very wordy. AP World History prompts tend to sound very wordy for absolutely no reason. They'll stick a lot of fun words in there, like not exactly in this one, but evaluate, which isn't even a difficult word, but when you see evaluate the extent, it just kind of scares you a little because that's not something we typically hear in English. Words like diffusion, words like egalitarian, that have relatively simple meanings, but they're added in there to confuse you. So something you want to know is just understand these basic phrases that the College Board loves to include on these exams. So the first three words, evaluate the extent. So basically, evaluate the extent is basically fancy rewording of saying, talk about how important something is. Talk about the ideas of something. It sounds very specific. The three words, evaluate the extent. You just want to talk about how they were different or how they were the same, how they impacted people or how they didn't impact people. It's really just a very wordy way of saying compare and contrast, or talk about how important something is It's something that you just like to include, and I see it a lot on even SAQs. The word evaluate. Just know that that basically just means to write. And then wealth accumulation is just a phrase for saying getting money. It's essentially the same thing as getting money, but it sounds a lot more formal and it sounds a lot more intelligent. So that's something you want to know. Wealth accumulation is basically what it says in the very bottom of the slide, wealth creation, getting money. So just before we go into the actual DBQ, be sure that you understand the words that you're going to see in your prompt. And if you go into the room on test day and you see a word and I'm like, I've never heard the word cultural diffusion before. You see the word cultural and then you just have to use context skills to figure out diffusion. I liked, usually the AP world history prompts will tend to repeat some certain information. If you didn't know what accumulation was, you see the word wealth later with the word creation next to it. So you can just assume that creation and accumulation are synonyms or near synonyms. So that's something you definitely want to pay attention to. Just because, you know, AP World History, as I said before, is a college level course. So they're going to use college level vocabulary. So keep an eye out for these words, and you'll see a lot of words throughout this course that are repeated, like evaluate. I've seen the word evaluate so many times. So the first time I took my first DBQ, I did not do very well. I said the word evaluate, and I was just confused. Like evaluate the extent just sounded like such a difficult phrase, but in reality, it just means to summarize, talk about this, write about this. So be sure that you can use your context skills, your historical thinking skills to better understand and answer this prompt to your best ability, your best capability. So this is our first document. And you'll see what I mentioned before, how it says on top. I was going to point on my screen. That's not going to work. This little tiny biography. And it's not about a person, essentially, because you can see that the Chronicle of Zuo is italicized. So when something's italicized, you know it's usually going to be from a book or a journal, or it's a little early for magazines, so probably not a magazine, but from a book, a manuscript, something of that nature. So I'm going to read document 1 in case you can't see it. If you're on a computer, you might be able to see it. It's still kind of small. If you're on the Crowdcast app, you probably cannot read this slide. So I'm going to read it. So, source, the Chronicle of Zuo, one of the earliest Chinese historical works, composed during the Warring States period, circa 350 BCE. I'm going to start reading it. An ambassador from another Chinese state desired a jade ring that belonged to a merchant who resided in the Chinese state of Lu. So the ambassador begged Ji Chan, a Lu official, to have the ring confiscated from the merchant and given to him. Ji Chan, however, refused, saying, "One of our ancient rulers made a pact with the merchants in our states to last through all generations. The pact said, if you do not revolt against me, the ruler, I will not violently interfere with your commerce. I will not beg or take anything from you, and you may have your profitable markets, precious things, and substance, without my taking of knowledge of them. Through this attested covenant, our rulers and the merchants who live in our territory have preserved their mutual relations down to the present day. If you get the jade and lose a friendly state, wouldn't that be a mistake?" The ambassador then changed his mind, saying, "I presumed in my stupidity to ask for the jade, which would have occasioned such a calamity. Let me now withdraw my request." So that's your first document. If anyone who's watching this could just go into the chat, if you think you have an idea as to what this document is saying, the main idea of this document, the thesis statement of this document would be, keep it in the chat. Just like a quick 1-sentence, 2-sentence summary of what's going on in this document. Okay, so probably I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. It's a really complex document. It's written in almost an archaic style of language, and maybe the fact that it was translated from whatever Chinese dialect it was written in might have made it a little more difficult sounding when translated into English. So it's also about a very historical topic, and historical topics tend to have a little more difficult, in-depth writing. So if you don't understand what this document's about, it's completely fine. Like going into this class, I probably did not have any idea about these things, especially because of the wording in a lot of old things. And then you can see in the source that it was composed during the Warring States period, which was before the Common Era. So you can imagine language was very different at that time. The way people wrote, what people even talked about was completely different. Like there's things that people talked about in 350 BCE that we wouldn't even imagine to talk about now. So if you don't understand that, that's completely fine. I'm going to go over this document in depth. If there's any students, I see that one of the teachers has answered about the question, but if you are a student and you're just completely stuck, just say it in the chat. Like it's completely fine. If you're still writing your summary, it's fine too. I just want to explain because, the DBQs do have quite a few documents and lots of sources. So this is just our first one, so it's going to be really fun. But I think I'm going to go over it. So what Mr. Dorto said is completely correct. So this document is talking about preserving a promise. And basically what the document is saying is that as long as a person follows the ruler, the monarchy, that commerce will be preserved. Commerce is just another way to say trade. If you think that you're saying the word trade too much, just commerce and trade are synonyms. That trade will be preserved and it won't be interfered by others. And then the ambassador at the end is realizing that what he said is correct and that they would no longer request the jade ring. So I'm going to read over what I wrote. And I actually, at the very end of this paragraph, I included a connection to another historical event that I do not believe is mentioned in any other document. I related it to something that happened later in Chinese history, and I related it to the Roman Empire. So just if you want to get those points that are relating, this is something that you just might want to listen to, how to explain things that are happening on different continents at different times. And this is just an example. Due to competition between different states during the Warring States period, the Chinese began encouraging wealth accumulation through trade. That's just a bit of background information that I had, not exactly supported by this document. So document 1 describes an interaction between a Chinese state and a Chinese state official from another region who refused to take the state's appeal to unlawfully take merchants' valuables. Wealth accumulation through trade was most likely supported by the Chinese state because trade is useful for keeping funds, and this money could be used to support the military. My historical thinking about why the ambassador at the end is like, I'm not going to request this jade ring, and why the region is saying that trade shouldn't be interfered. So why would they say that? And this is just my historical thinking, something that I'm assuming as a historian. So I say that China, of course, would support trade because it keeps funds going, and this money could be used to support the military, which is really helpful because it says here in the sources, the super helpful sources, please check these, that it happened during the Warring States period. And during the Warring States period, there was lots of war. So you needed to support the military through any money that you could possibly find. And there was definitely money coming from trade. Later in history, the Chinese showed their support of trade through Zheng He. I never knew if it was Zheng He or Zheng He. I kind of use them interchangeably. But Zheng He, who traveled the world and traded with people that he encountered. Although this wealth accumulation was seen as mostly positive, the extreme wealth of merchants created economic differences with others, and eventually a major gap as seen with the patricians and plebeians in the Roman Empire. So I'm talking about Zheng He, who comes during this time period, which I believe this is from until 1500 Common Era. So yes, this is around the time of Zheng He, and I talk about his travels and how trade is still looked upon as a good thing later in history, because this is a lot earlier than the travels of Zheng He. So I related it to a later historical event in the same continent, And then I related it to how it's making a major gap because these people who are merchants are making a lot more money. And I related it to the patricians and the plebeians of the Roman Empire, which is a topic you may have gone over in AP World History. If I think it's still October, so you might have gone over the patricians and the plebeians at this time. So we're going to go to document 2. See, it's a lot shorter. The paragraphs are a lot shorter. The amazing source. I'm going to read the source. The sources are, I can't say enough good things about the sources. The source, Chanakya, advisor to the first Mauryan Empire, Arthashastra, economic and political treatise, circa 250 before Common Era. The superintendent of commerce shall monitor demand and the changing prices of various kinds of merchandise, both domestically produced and bought from other countries. He shall also determine the time suitable for the distribution, purchase, and sale of different kinds of merchandise. He shall avoid setting prices that allow for such large profits for merchants as to harm people. All those who sell merchandise shall submit to the superintendent their sale reports, saying, "This much has been sold, and this much remains." They shall also hand over their weights and measures for inspection. The superintendent of commerce shall fix prices to allow a profit of 5% for local commodities and 10% on foreign produce. Merchants who inflate the price even half a penny more than that shall be punished with a fine. So we can see that this is very different from the other document. This document is essentially just a big rule book. It's talking about how Chanakya has written about all these different rules and all these different limits that he set on his people so that trade is completely fair. So you can imagine that he supports trade as long as it's fair. It's a little more of a straightforward document compared to the other one, which was a lot more archaic sounding, but I'm going to read what I wrote. And I relate it back to the previous document about China. As in China, Mauryan India also encouraged trade and other means of wealth accumulation. So that's my point. I'm trying to sort documents by things that they support. So maybe I'll group one by like supporting trade and one by not supporting trade, or you might want to divide them into religious and then state. Something that I mentioned before that you do during the reading period. But I chose to basically divide this by support and not support. According to Chanakya, the author of document 2, in order to maintain the wealth of the people, the government offered travelers along the sea roads with protection, as long as they paid a special tax. Yes. So it says here that they demanded and changed prices of various kinds of merchandise, both domestically produced and bought from other countries. So if something would come from another country that wasn't domestically produced, you'd most likely have to pay a tax. You'd also determine the time suitable for distribution and purchase and sales of kind. And you can't set prices that are going to give you these crazy large profits if they're unfair. So overall, I said that Mauryan India was extremely pro-trade, and they wanted fixed prices. They wanted prices that weren't exactly like not exactly fixed prices. They wanted something that would work for the people, something that would be fair for all people, regardless of their economic well-being, but this is I'm losing it. But basically, what this document is saying is that regardless of what's going on, these goods, that we should have rules, because if we don't have rules, then what's the point? Everyone's going to go crazy and the merchants are going to get a lot more money. So that's essentially what this document was trying to say. They're pro-trade, and that kind of has a similarity with China. China was very pure trade. But you can see in both of these documents that they care more about care more about their state than maybe the well-being of their people. over how much money they're going to get. In the first document, we talked about this guy who wanted to just sell something for money, but then another person steps in and was like, no, we can't do that. That's not fair. And this document is talking about all the things you can't do and all the things you should do to be fair. So definitely some similarities between the China and the India one. Okay, so now we're on to document 3. And document 3 is a little different than any other documents because they're state responses to wealth. China was also a state response, and the other one was a state response. But this is a state response, and from now onwards, most of them are going to be religious responses. So this one's kind of unique compared to documents 4 and 5 and 6, I believe. So the source, it's from Marcus Cicero, who is a Roman statesman and philosopher, and this comes from something he wrote called An Essay About Duties, which is from 50 before Common Era. We generally accept as true the following statements about trade and occupations, in regard to which are suitable for gentlemen and which are vulgar. First, those occupations are condemned, which bring upon you people's hatred, such as tax collecting and money lending. Also, vulgar and unsuitable for gentlemen are the occupations of all hired workmen whom we pay for their labor, not for their artistic skills. Also, to be considered vulgar are retail merchants, who buy from wholesale merchants and immediately turn around and resell. For they would not make a profit unless they lied a lot. Of all the occupations from which profit is accrued, none is better than agriculture, none more profitable, none more delightful, none more suitable to a free man. When Cato, a Roman statesman well known for his moral integrity, was asked what was the best form of property ownership, he replied, raising livestock with great success. And after that, raising livestock with little success. And third, raising crops. And when does the person asking the question said, what about money lending? Cato replied, what about murder? This is a very extreme document with some very extreme claims about what job is the best and maybe some not so great stereotypes of merchants. So if you want to do a quick summary of what this document is saying, it's a relatively short one as well. So just a one sentence about what is going on in this document. Yeah, these documents are not easy on the first run. I said this before, I'm going to just keep repeating myself, but the archaic language, topics that you never really hear before, these just odd connections, this way that people had of just styling their writing in this time period. It's just so different than what we see. So it takes you a while to understand what the documents are even saying. So if you don't understand them now, it's completely fine. It's still October. The AP exam is in May. You have so much time to learn how to understand these documents, how to interpret the information in these documents. This is a relatively straightforward document because he only, Marcus Cicero, only goes over one perspective. And you'll see a lot of ones that are more opinionated, like he's saying none is better than agriculture, that type of stuff. A lot of opinion writers tend to include the opposite of what they're saying just for like effect. So he only includes his opinion without addressing the opinion of the other side. So it's relatively more straightforward than any other documents that we're going to see. So document 7 is a state response to wealth, as I said before. It was written during the late Republican era of the Roman Empire. That's just prior knowledge that you can include. You don't have to include, but it says the time, the year, and the source, of course, because the source is so helpful. So if you just wanted to include that it was written circa 50 before Common Era, go for it. It's really good information, and it helps you understand where Cicero's coming from because of his time period. So it was written during the late Republican era of the Roman Empire, which was extremely turbulent because poor citizens protested the amounts of wealth that the powerful elite had, especially those who owned latifundas. In this document, Cicero explains that agriculture is the most profitable job and is the occupation that is most suitable to a man. So that's explained in the first paragraph. That's essentially his thesis, his main idea, like the thesis that you're going to have when you do your DBQs. That's his main idea. Agriculture is the best job. And then he explains it later on. Tax collectors, moneylenders, and merchants are furthermore described as vulgar and liars. Although the government did not support the jobs of these people, they accumulated a large amount of wealth and contributed to the economy. So even though Cicero is saying like these people are really terrible, agriculture is so profitable. As people are making more money being merchants, so what he's saying is not essentially true, and his government would have not been able to support itself without the work of merchants. So that's essentially what I'm saying here, and what this document says. So I'm probably going to go up to document 5. Not going to do most of the documents because at this point they get kind of repetitive. I'm going to want to go over document 4, and then if there is a drawing or an art of any kind, an example of art and sculpture in this example, I'm definitely going to go over that as my last. So document 4, I'm going to check my writing because I kind of organized these in a very odd manner. Okay, so this is from Gerontius, who is a Christian monk, and it's from The Life of Melania the Younger, a state's biography composed circa 450 CE. The Blessed Melania and her husband Pinion both come from the foremost Roman families of the senatorial rank, but they resolved to abandon their frivolous and worldly mode of life and experience an angelic heavenly purpose. They left the great city of Rome and went to their suburban estate, where they devoted themselves to the practice of virtues. They knew that it was impossible for them to offer pure worship to God unless they made themselves enemies to the confusions of a wealthy life. Melania described their estate in the following manner. It was an extraordinary piece of property, and in it stood a bath that surpassed any other in worldly splendor. The estate had a total of 62 settlements within its borders, with 400 slaves. But I knew that it was the devil who sent me before those multicolored marbles, the villa, and all that inestimable revenue. So the blessed ones fearfully gave away all their possessions, which were enough for the entire world. They established monasteries of monks and nuns, furnishing each place with a sufficient amount of gold. They presented their numerous expensive clothes at the altars of churches and made many other offerings to God. So this document is a little different compared to any other document because it doesn't really mention trade as much as the other ones. The other ones were like trade. And this one's just talking about a really rich family that gives up a lot of their money and gives it to the church. I was going to ask you what the document was about, but I just realized I kind of gave you the reason. So this is document 4. And document 4 is basically the story of a very, very, very wealthy Roman family. And they gave a large portion of their fortune to the church. This fortune of the church most likely benefited the church really well. You know, when churches have a lot of money at this time period, not essentially as much anymore, but these churches had so much money. So when churches had these resources, they might have built monasteries for monks. They might have built monasteries for nuns. They might have used the money to do renovations. So document 4 is essentially just telling us about this family that gave up a lot of their money and gave it to the church. I would talk about maybe how this might be biased. This is probably the document I would use to explain the the prejudice. I was going to say biasedness, which I don't think is a word, but the prejudice of some of these authors. So you can see up here, it's from Gerontius, who is a Christian monk. So of course, if he's a Christian monk, he's going to talk highly about this family that gave all their money to the church. Of course, he's going to talk about how amazing they are and how godly they are, because the money that they give to the church most likely benefited him. This money probably gave him shelter, most likely gave him some nice renovations, most likely gave him food to live on. So of course he's going to speak highly of this family. It'd be highly unlikely that Gerontius would just say that I don't like this family, but they didn't give money to the church. They gave money to the church, but I don't like them. Of course not. He's gonna like that they gave him all this money, that they gave the church support. Of course, he's gonna be somewhat biased because he's a Christian monk, and this money is benefiting him. So I'm gonna see. Oh, here we go. So this is the last document I'm gonna want to go over tonight, just because I feel like they're becoming a little tedious. And if you guys want me to go over all of the documents, that's completely fine. But I feel like once that you have a nice support on what to look for when you're doing these documents, of course, looking at many of them is going to help you. But at some point, it just becomes very repetitive, especially since you don't know what you're going to get for the documents. The documents could be about anything from any time period. They could be art, they could be about government, they can just be plays or stuff like that. So I feel like this is the last one we'll go over just because it's so incredibly different than any of the other documents. So this document, source, painting from the Buddhist cave temples at Bezeklik, Central Asia, circa 800 Common Era. The painting shows the Buddha and Bodhisattvas blessing Central Asian traders bearing gifts for the Bezeklik temples. Shahir, hopefully I'm saying that correctly. I have the most difficulty with some names. I'm completely sorry. Some of these documents are hard to decipher. Do you have any tips for figuring out the hard language? Yeah, a lot of these documents are very difficult to decipher. A lot are much easier than others. Usually, personally, I find documents written this early in history. You won't see any documents from this early in history just because of the changes to the AP World History curriculum. But a lot of documents from around like 1600 to 1800 for some reason are just so difficult for me. And something that you really have to work on as an AP World History student and as a historian is your context clues. And I feel like that's something a lot of people haven't heard since maybe like fourth grade English, but it's really helpful in AP World because there's so many words. Something like bodhisattvas. Let's say you didn't see this definition here. I just completely covered this definition, but you see this sentence, the painting shows the Buddha and bodhisattvas blessing Central Asian traders. Let's say I had no idea what a bodhisattva was, and I was just very confused. You have to use your context clues, your prior knowledge, and maybe just your skills as a historian and someone who knows English to understand what they're talking about. So just completely ignore the definition, but the painting shows the Buddha and bodhisattvas blessing. So in this case, blessing would be the word I would look at, because when I hear the word blessing, I think religion. I think of something to do with religion, holiness, something to do with maybe helping other people. And we can see that in the definition. They're holy figures. So that's something you can get from your context clues because of the word blessing. It's probably going to have to do with religion. And then let's say you didn't know the in Buddhism part. So I was like, I wonder what religion these bodhisattvas must be following. If the bodhisattvas even do follow a religion, or if they're prevalent and maybe the book of a certain religion or the art of people who follow this certain religion or so on. So this sentence mentions the Buddha and the words Buddhist. So because of the repetition of the word Buddhist and Buddha, you can basically assume that bodhisattvas are in Hinduism. So the word blessing makes me think of religion, and then Buddhism and the word Buddhism and Buddha make me think of Buddhism. And because of those two words, I can assume that bodhisattvas are just holy figures in Buddhism. I'm going to see if there's any other documents. I feel like this one's a little more straightforward. It's more of like a visual, formal analysis and artistic analysis about what's going on. But I feel like the art here, it also gives you a very nice description of what's going on in the art, so you can use that description to your advantage. I'm going to look here for maybe some difficult words that you might not understand. Let's go maybe to one of the earlier documents. I would definitely go to document 1 because I feel personally document 1 and document 1 uses the most difficult language. So I want you to look at this sentence. So starting with this, and I'm going to end right here. So through this attested covenant, our rulers and merchants who lived in our territory have preserved their mutual relations down to this present day. So we just, covenant is the word here. Maybe you don't know as much about religion and you don't know what the word covenant means. And you just see this and you're just very confused about the meaning of the word covenant. We want to use these context clues. And because we see the word this through this, we know that the word covenant or a covenant must have been described earlier. So through this attested covenant, this covenant must have been described earlier. So I'm going to reread. An ambassador from another Chinese state desired a jade ring that belonged to a merchant who resided in the Chinese state of Lu. So the ambassador begged Zhichan, a Lu official, to have the ring confiscated from the merchant and given to him. Zhichan, however, refused, saying, "One of our ancient rulers made a pact with the merchants in our state to last through all generations. The pact said, if you do not revolt against me, the ruler, I will not violently interfere with your commerce. I will not beg or take anything from you, and you may have your profitable markets, precious things, and substance, without my taking of knowledge of them, through this attested covenant." That's where I'm going to end. If you don't know what the word covenant is, I want you, whoever asked this, Shahir, or maybe any of the other people that are still still watching this stream, for you to maybe summarize what's going on earlier in the first paragraph. Before they even mention the word covenant, what is going on in this first half of the first paragraph? And I want you to just put that in the comment box, and then we're going to use our context clues as historians and as English speakers to help us try and figure out the definition of covenant. Bodhisattvas are essentially Buddhist saints. They're holy figures in Buddhism because they postponed entering the state of nirvana in order to return to another life. That's something I mentioned in my contextualization, I believe. Yes. I was talking about the Four Noble Truths, but I still talked about entry into nirvana, and I related it to Hindu aestheticism. So even you can see, as Mr. Diorto mentioned, you can use stuff like this, Buddhism, religion, in your contextualization. What he gave you right now in the content box essentially would make a really great contextualization about maybe the rise of Buddhism and other religions that are mentioned in this. It also goes over perspectives in Islam, perspectives in Christianity. I believe those are the only other religions. And then you can mention those and you can talk about the rise of those religions and maybe relate it to religion that's not mentioned. Like I put Hindu aestheticism, which is not a religion in itself, but Hinduism. So no one answered, so I'm just going to go over it briefly. So essentially, think, where do you hear about covenants? Yeah, covenants, as I said before, are religion. So the religious definition, if you knew it before, is a talk between a person and God. But if you don't know that, the people in the first paragraph essentially are just having a conversation. You see the word said so many times, or a conjugation of the word say, to say. You have saying right here. You have said right here. You see a dialogue here even. You see these markings. We know that people are speaking. And they're using the word say and said. So you know that has something to do with conversation through this attested conversation. So essentially, when not used in a religious context like in here, it's just describing a regular conversation. Covenant is just essentially a conversation. So it's just a very formal, not as essentially archaic, because people do still use the word covenant, but it's just a word that they're going to use just because this was written in an older time. But using your context clues, even if you don't practice a certain religion, or if you just don't know what the word covenant is, you can just read this and using your context clues. Also, the word pact. I'm going to look for that right now, but I believe, okay, the pact said. So right next to this verb said, you have, no, this way. The word pact, and a pact is an agreement. Pact and covenant are not essentially like exact synonyms, but they're definitely close enough for you to make a connection in your brain. They also mention the word commerce more than once, as Mr. Dorto mentions before. So by repeating the word commerce and commerce and commerce over and over again, it clues you that they're going in agreement, that they're agreeing, they're having a conversation, not exactly one with God, but one with each other. So I went over most of these documents, did not go over 5, we did not go over 7, but I feel like this may be a little tedious, especially for you, because I've been reading documents for over an hour, and I went over quite a bit today. I went over how to write a whole DBQ and how to basically read your documents, how to plan your DBQ in an hour and 10 minutes, and I've just been talking quite a bit. So if anyone wants to see another document, that's fine, but what I wanted to do was go into my conclusion. They're making a pact with merchants in our state. So yeah, definitely with the word pacts, merchants usually have to talk with one another. Deals are usually made, and pacts are related to covenants as well. And by using merchants in our states, you can just guess that it has something to do with trade. So I'm going to go into my conclusion. So your conclusion does not need to be the conclusion that you have in English, where you summarize everything you mentioned before, and then it ends up being just a humongous summary. A conclusion does not need to be that. It does not need to be wordy. Essentially, your conclusion is just restating your thesis in different words. So you don't need to do a conclusion for your DBQ. It is not a point. It is not something you're going to get or something you're going to lose if you don't do a conclusion. But I just like doing a conclusion to wrap everything up. I'm that kind of person that likes to start with a beginning paragraph and end with an ending paragraph. So if you have time and you've already pre-read your DBQ and you feel like you have some type of confidence that you did really well and you have another 5 minutes left, then write a conclusion. It'll make your DBQ sound a lot more planned and like it ended well, not something that was just very abrupt and rushed. It's not mandatory, of course, but I basically just restated my thesis. So my thesis was, in the period from 600 BCE to 1500 CE, religious responses to wealth accumulation in Eurasia differed from state responses because religious people and their institutions focused on the morality of making large sums of money, while the state focused on using it to solve realistic issues. And then my conclusion is essentially just a summarization of that. It's like that, but a little simpler and in one sentence. In conclusion, religious responses to large sums of money different from those of the state because religion encouraged donating it while the state did not. So just a simple conclusion, just to restate everything without going into really specifics. So that's how you write a DBQ. I hope that everyone is still okay after me reading everything and talking for an hour and almost 15 minutes. And hopefully everyone took notes and this whole entire thing and what's going on in the documents. If anyone has any questions, feel free to still ask in the chat. But this is the end of my lesson. Takes probably another 3-4 minutes just for questions to start trickling in. But from now on, if you want to leave the presentation, that's completely fine. We're not going to go over any other content unless you want to stick around to ask questions or maybe see if there are questions that come through. You want to see my answers to those questions, then definitely stick around. but it's not mandatory at this. It wasn't mandatory to begin with, but it's not as important now. So I haven't checked this poll, but it seems like no one's favorite section of the AP World History exam is the DBQ, which I can completely understand. DBQs, my favorite section was hands down multiple choice. I'm a multiple choice kind of person. I feel like they're more to the point, whereas writing can be interpreted so many different ways. Documents can be interpreted so many different ways, and they can be very just free with explanation, and you can just go on for hours and hours and hours. Well, multiple choice usually just have one definite answer. One person likes the long essay question, which I can see why, because you don't have to use any prior evidence. I can see why someone would like the LEQ, and the options are just great. And no one likes them equally, which is expected, because I don't think anyone would be like, I like all the parts of the AP World History exam equally. Documents are just really hard, especially like the broadness of all the documents, the art documents, which are, I feel like people find them very difficult. The art ones, because, you know, we don't really study a lot of art in AP World until you probably get to the Renaissance. That's probably the most art you'll ever see in AP World. But I'm a sophomore now, and I'm taking AP Art History. So it's essentially like AP World all over again. So if you are taking any art class or AP Art History with AP World History at the same time, you see so many connections. And as someone last year who really liked art, not exactly like drawing art or making art, because I'm not a very good artist, but as someone who really likes the history aspect of art and sculpture, it made that very easy for me. And there's something in art called a visual or formal analysis. So when you're making that, you'll want to look at the art, maybe point out some things that you see in the art that connect to maybe its purpose in history. You see that it has this certain, maybe we'll go over the pyramids right now. The pyramids are empty inside. They're not exactly hollow, but they're empty inside. And they're empty because they were to store deceased pharaohs. And then you could talk about how this relates to the importance of the afterlife and the Ka in Egyptian religion. And then you can talk about the Egyptian dynasties, and everything relates. And even though the art documents are seen as really tough, like I feel like last year, what people found the most difficult were the art documents. They really they require a lot of free thinking and a lot of connections. You can't look at an art document and think directly, oh, I see that they say this, because there's no words in an art document. You have to interpret it with your own very eyes and look for things like line and perspective to give you an idea of what it was used for, why it was used for this, etc. So it seems like there's no more questions. So I'm going to end this broadcast. I hope that everyone had a great time learning how to do the DBQ, how to write a DBQ well, how to just plan all your information to make a really effective DBQ where you can get your point across and still get all the possible points you can, because you're using all this outside evidence and all these really great techniques that are going to ensure that you get a really good score. So I hope that you guys had a very, very good time, and now that you're a little less confused about the DBQ and what to expect when you're actually taking the AP exam. And I hope all of you guys have a great rest of the day, and I hope that when you do your next DBQ, you'll remember some of these tips and you'll do really well. So bye, guys.